There is a kind of silence that frightens most people, the one that arrives when the world stops speaking to us. The phone goes quiet, the friends drift away, the noise that used to fill every hour disappears, and suddenly there it is, your own voice echoing in the emptiness. That is the moment most try to escape. We run back to distraction, to company, to the warmth of another heartbeat. But Carl Jung would say, stay, because that silence, that haunting stillness, is not punishment. It is the beginning of the sacred. We live in an age allergic to solitude. We confuse being alone with being unwanted, silence with failure, stillness with boredom. Our culture worships connection, constant communication, eternal relevance. But beneath that obsession lies a terror, the fear of meeting the self. Jung called this fear the horror vacui, the horror of the void. Yet it is only in that void that the soul begins to speak. The soul needs loneliness, Jung wrote, for it is only in solitude that one can find one's own source. It's not an abstract idea. It's a biological truth of the psyche. Just as the body needs sleep, the soul needs solitude, intervals of stillness to metabolize experience. But the modern mind, overstimulated and hungry for validation, rarely stops long enough to digest its own emotions. Think of how many relationships exist only to fill the silence. How many friendships survive on constant talking but never on shared quiet. We mistake noise for connection because silence makes us feel exposed. But Jung would remind us, silence doesn't expose your weakness, it reveals your depth. He once said that the person who cannot stand to be alone has not yet met themselves. Solitude then is not loneliness, it's confrontation. It's when all the voices we've been drowning finally rise to the surface. The forgotten dreams, the buried fears, the unlived desires. The ego trembles before them, but the soul sighs with recognition. There's a paradox here. The more we run from solitude, the more we depend on others to reflect who we are. And yet, the less we know who that is. That's why so many relationships crumble when the noise fades, because the person inside was never truly met, even by themselves. Jung saw solitude as initiation, a rite of passage from the outer world to the inner one. Every culture once understood this. Shamans, mystics, monks, all withdrew into the wilderness not to escape, but to return renewed. The desert, the cave, the forest, these were not symbols of isolation, but of transformation. In myth, the hero always leaves the village before he finds his power. The soul too must leave the village of opinions before it finds its center. Our modern deserts are quieter but no less vast. A night without notifications, a room without noise, a heart without constant validation. The sacred task is the same, to endure the silence until it becomes language. Because at first solitude sounds empty, then it begins to hum. Jung often spoke of the self, the deep organizing center of the psyche, older than the ego, wiser than reason. The self can't be heard in noise. It speaks in whispers, dreams, and moods. It waits for us in the stillness we avoid. Solitude is the temple where that voice echoes, and until we enter it willingly, life will find ways to push us there, through heartbreak, failure, illness, or loss. That's the secret Jung hinted at. Life conspires to bring us back to the self. What feels like abandonment is often initiation. The soul doesn't punish, it purifies. It strips away everything false so that the true can appear. We call it loneliness, but the psyche calls it remembering. Perhaps this is why, when we finally stop running, something ancient stirs. The silence, once unbearable, becomes strangely alive, as if the universe itself were listening back. That is the beginning of dialogue with the divine, what Jung called the numinous experience, the moment the inner world and outer world touch. So, if you find yourself alone, without answers, surrounded by quiet, don't rush to fill it. Don't mistake it for emptiness. It may be the oldest part of you, finally returning home. Because the truth is this: solitude is not the absence of love. It is the space where love learns how to breathe. Every initiation begins with exile. No one chooses the desert consciously. It chooses us. It begins when something we relied on disappears. A relationship ends, a dream collapses, a belief dissolves. The familiar dissolves, and the soul finds itself in a landscape where the horizon looks infinite but offers no direction. Jung would call this the night sea journey, the stage where consciousness descends into its own depths, stripped of its old maps. Most people fear this stage because the desert has no applause. There are no mirrors there to reflect who you think you are, only sand, wind, and silence. The ego hates such places because it cannot perform in them. But to the soul, this is nourishment. It is in this barrenness that the old self burns away. The ancients understood what we've forgotten. Solitude is not absence, it's initiation. Moses had to wander for 40 years. The Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree. Christ retreated to the wilderness. Each story describes the same psychological truth, the individual leaving the collective to hear the voice within. Jung said it plainly. The one who looks outside dreams, the one who looks inside awakes. But what happens when the inside feels just as empty as the outside? That's when the desert becomes real. At first it feels like loss, of direction, of faith, of self. Then comes the mirage phase. The desperate search for something to fill the silence. New distractions, new relationships, new noise. But the desert doesn't respond to avoidance. It waits. The soul is patient. It knows that the ego must first exhaust itself. Only when the noise dies down do we start hearing the subtle sounds of the psyche. Faint at first, like wind through dry branches. That's when something shifts. The loneliness doesn't end, but it changes flavor. It becomes textured, alive, like air before rain. Jung experienced this himself. After his break with Freud, he entered what he called a creative illness. He stopped lecturing, withdrew from society, and plunged into his own unconscious. People thought he was losing his mind. In truth, he was entering the desert within. Out of that solitude emerged his greatest work, the Red Book, a dialogue between consciousness and the soul. It wasn't madness, it was metamorphosis. We all have our own Red Book waiting to be written, the untold language of our solitude. But we can't write it while pretending to be someone else. That's why Jung insisted that loneliness is a necessary stage in individuation. To become yourself, you must first stand apart from the crowd, from the noise, even from your old self-image. Individuation begins when you stop asking, "Who should I be?" and start asking, "What is seeking to live through me?" This question is born only in silence. The ego can't answer it, but the self can. The self doesn't speak in sentences. It speaks in symbols. It appears in dreams, synchronicities, sudden intuitions. But these messages are soft. They require quiet to be heard. The desert is the classroom where you learn that language. The paradox of solitude is that at its deepest point, you realize you were never alone. The same intelligence that moves the stars begins to move within you. The silence you feared reveals itself as full, not of emptiness, but of presence. The sacred hides in what we mistake for absence. Modern psychology often calls this phase the dark night of the soul, but Jung gave it a different tone. He saw it as the psyche's way of restoring balance. The soul withdraws from the world when the world becomes too loud. It's not rejection, it's protection, like a seed retreating underground before it blooms. So if you find yourself in that inner desert, unsure, isolated, stripped of meaning, don't rush to escape. Sit with it, walk through it. There are truths that can only be found when the horizon is empty. The desert burns, yes, but it also purifies. It removes everything that is not essential. And when the first green shoots appear, a small joy, a moment of peace, an unexpected tear, you'll understand what Jung meant when he said, the meeting with oneself is at first the meeting with one's own shadow, but also the gateway to the self. Because solitude in the end is not punishment, it's pilgrimage. The desert, which once seemed to strip you bare, is actually where your true name is whispered for the first time. At first, the silence feels hostile, a vast, indifferent space where every echo is your own. But stay long enough and it begins to change. It starts to look back at you. The stillness becomes a mirror. And in that reflection, you start to see what you've spent years avoiding. This is the sacred paradox of solitude. Once the outer noise disappears, the inner voices emerge. Jung said that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And yet, the soul waits patiently, like a wild animal at the edge of the forest, watching us chase distractions until exhaustion brings us home. In silence, there's no one left to perform for. No audience to applaud your cleverness. No mirror to confirm your beauty. Just you, unadorned, uncertain, entirely real. It's terrifying at first because we've built our lives on reflection. How others see us, how society names us, how success defines us. But solitude dismantles the illusion. It strips away the borrowed identities until what remains is something raw and unmistakable: presence. Jung believed that the psyche seeks wholeness the way a plant seeks sunlight. When you stop running, the unconscious begins to reach upward. The dreams intensify, the coincidences multiply, the emotions deepen. You start noticing patterns, subtle, symbolic, as if life itself were writing messages between your breaths. This is what Jung called the compensatory function of the unconscious. When consciousness becomes too one-sided, the psyche compensates by bringing up the neglected half. In solitude, this compensation becomes visible. The perfectionist begins to dream of chaos. The cynic dreams of love. The rationalist dreams of storms. The unconscious is not trying to destroy you, it's trying to balance you. Most people mistake this for regression, but Jung would say, no, it's emergence. The soul is reorganizing itself. Solitude amplifies what's hidden so that integration can begin. There is an ancient myth about Narcissus that fits here. We remember only the part where he falls in love with his reflection. But we forget that what he saw was not vanity. It was recognition. Narcissus didn't die from pride. He died from not realizing that the beauty he admired was his own soul, calling him home. Jung reinterpreted this myth. Narcissism, he said, is what happens when we mistake the reflection for the self, when we love the image and forget the essence. Solitude breaks that spell. It cracks the mirror, and in those fractures the real self begins to glimmer through. You realize that all your projections, every person you loved, envied, hated, were fragments of this same reflection. The world was never outside you. It was your unconscious projected into form. The silence then is not isolation, it's integration. When Jung worked with patients lost in depression or emptiness, he didn't try to fix them. He invited them to listen. He told them to draw their dreams, write their visions, pay attention to symbols, because meaning doesn't come from solving. It comes from seeing. To see through the mirror of silence is to discover this symbolic language. The random coincidence becomes synchronicity. The dream becomes a message. The loneliness becomes dialogue. And then something subtle happens. The fear begins to dissolve. The presence of your own depths, of time itself, of something ancient moving through you. The solitude that once felt like exile begins to feel like home. It is here, in this intimate encounter, that individuation takes root. You begin to see that solitude is not an obstacle to connection. It's the foundation of it. Only the one who has met themselves can truly meet another. When Jung spoke of the self, he described it as a center that both transcends and embraces the ego, like the calm eye of a storm. In solitude, you step closer to that center. You begin to sense that the stillness inside you is not emptiness but eternity. The same consciousness that watches your thoughts also watched over the first fire, the first dawn, the first word ever spoken. So stay with the mirror. Don't rush to shatter it or escape it. Let it show you what you've been too busy to see. Because one day when the noise returns, and it will, you'll find that you no longer need the world to reflect who you are. You'll carry that stillness with you, and it will carry you. There comes a moment in every journey of solitude when silence no longer feels empty. It feels alive. The air thickens with a strange clarity. You start to sense that the space around you is listening, that something immense, invisible and intelligent has been waiting all along. That is the threshold of the sacred. What Jung called numinous experience, the direct encounter with the mystery that words cannot contain. It doesn't arrive with trumpets or visions. It arrives quietly, in the sound of your breath, in the light through the window, in the heartbeat that reminds you, I exist. At first it feels almost awkward, a tenderness too intimate to describe. And then you realize that what you're feeling is not loneliness, it's presence. The same presence that mystics called God, poets called beauty, and Jung called the self. The temple of solitude is not built of stone, it's built of awareness. You don't find it in a monastery. You build it wherever you stand when you stop running from yourself. Its altar is your attention. Its prayer is silence. And its offering is honesty. In this temple, nothing is demanded of you. No doctrine, no performance, no perfection. The only requirement is sincerity. To stand before yourself without disguise. That is the truest act of devotion. Jung said that the modern world suffers not from the absence of faith, but from the absence of experience. We replaced mystery with explanation. We traded ritual for routine. But the soul doesn't need explanations. It needs reverence. When you begin to treat your own silence as sacred, something shifts in the texture of reality. Ordinary moments become luminous. Washing the dishes, walking alone at night, watching the sky, all of it begins to hum with meaning. The veil thins. The sacred returns not as lightning, but as softness. Jung called this experience individuation, reward, the gradual realization that the divine is not somewhere else. It's the light inside the darkness you feared. It's the quiet intelligence that sustains your heartbeat. The spiritual path is not ascent, but integration. The divine is not above you, it's within you, and it waits behind every honest moment of solitude. There is a story from Jung's Memories, Dreams, Reflections. He once sat alone by the lake near his home, looking at the water. He said that for the first time he felt utterly one with everything. The trees, the sky, the stones. I am not alone, he wrote. I am a part of all. That realization didn't come through belief. It came through solitude. The modern mind has forgotten how to enter that temple. We fear stillness because it reveals what noise hides, the direct connection between soul and cosmos. Yet that connection is the very medicine we crave. We search for meaning in consumption, belonging, ideology. But meaning cannot be imported. It must be experienced. In the temple of aloneness, there are no idols, only symbols. The difference is that an idol demands worship, while a symbol invites understanding. A sunset, a tear, a melody, each is a symbol. They point beyond themselves to the invisible field Jung called the collective unconscious, the web that connects every living thing. When you sit in silence long enough, you begin to feel that web. It's subtle, like warmth rising from the earth. You realize you were never separate. Solitude then becomes communion, not isolation from the world, but participation in its deeper rhythm. You stop craving validation because you start feeling belonging. Not social belonging, but cosmic belonging. The world no longer feels like something to conquer or escape, but something to listen to. Jung believed that the individual's reconciliation with the soul could heal more than the person. It could heal civilization. The salvation of the world, he said, depends on the salvation of the individual soul. When a person reclaims the sacred within, they radiate coherence outward. Their presence itself becomes prayer. So perhaps the reason the world feels so fractured is because we have forgotten to build these inner temples. We have churches, but no silence. We have gurus, but no listening. We have faith, but little intimacy with the divine. Yet the temple still stands, waiting, not in the clouds, but in the heart that dares to be alone. Go there. Sit down. Breathe. There's a voice you haven't heard in a long time waiting in that silence. It doesn't command. It remembers. It says softly, "You were never alone. You were only asleep." And that's how solitude becomes what Jung always knew it was. Not exile, but homecoming. Freedom sounds beautiful until you realize how heavy it is. In solitude, when the noise fades and the mirrors vanish, something unsettling appears. Choice. The kind that can't be outsourced to society, religion, or relationship. The kind that whispers, now that you know who you are, what will you do with it? This is the moment Jung warned about, when the individual can no longer hide behind collective values. The most terrifying thing, he wrote, is to accept oneself completely. Because once you do, excuses evaporate. You can't unsee your truth. You can't unknow your calling. You cannot pretend you don't hear the voice of the self guiding you through the quiet. Freedom, Jung believed, is not the absence of constraint, but the presence of consciousness. The more awake you become, the more you realize that freedom is not about doing whatever you want. It is about becoming who you truly are. But becoming yourself means leaving behind the borrowed versions that once kept you safe. That's where solitude becomes heavy. It demands authenticity. In the temple of aloneness, you've met your soul, but now the temple's doors open outward. The silence that once healed you begins to ask for expression. The insights demand embodiment. You must return to the world carrying what you found. Jung called this the return from the underworld, the stage of individuation where inner truth must meet outer life. Most people resist this part. It's easier to remain in contemplation than to act. But consciousness that doesn't incarnate turns into stagnation. Jung wrote, "One does not live in order to become perfect, but to become complete." Completion means imperfection embraced, truth expressed, love embodied. And that requires courage. The courage to disappoint expectations, to lose belonging, to live by your own symbolic compass. Freedom, as Jung saw it, is inseparable from responsibility. The moment you awaken, the world no longer decides for you. You can't blame the system, the family, or the past. Individuation is a revolution that begins quietly within and ends in how you live. It's the act of taking ownership of your energy, the creative, destructive, erotic, intuitive forces that move through you, and shaping them consciously. That's what makes true solitude dangerous to the collective mind. A person who thinks, feels, and acts from the self can't be manipulated. They belong to something deeper than ideology, to the rhythm of their own soul. Jung called this the autonomy of the individual soul, and he believed it was the foundation of any civilization that wished to survive its own shadow. But freedom, like all archetypes, has a shadow too. When the ego claims it as possession, it turns into isolation. When consciousness mistakes itself for divinity, it inflates. That's why Jung insisted that freedom without humility becomes madness. The more you awaken, the more reverence you need. Solitude teaches this balance, the dance between autonomy and surrender. The desert burned your illusions. The temple revealed your essence. Now the open sky calls you to live it. And the sky, like the soul, is vast. It holds both the storm and the sun. The freedom you gain from solitude is not a tranquil escape. It's a wild invitation to participate in life with awareness. It's easy to think enlightenment means serenity. But Jung saw that true consciousness often increases suffering. Not because life gets worse, but because you start feeling everything. You become porous, empathetic, alive to both beauty and tragedy. Freedom enlarges your heart until it breaks open. And through that crack, compassion enters. That's the secret hidden in solitude. The more you meet yourself, the more you see yourself in everyone else. The boundaries soften. You stop dividing the world into good and bad, friend and foe. You begin to understand what Jung meant by the self as both personal and collective. Your awakening becomes a service, not through preaching but through presence. The weight of freedom is not a burden to escape, it's a trust to uphold. The soul has lent you a portion of eternity, and it asks that you live it consciously. Every choice, every relationship, every small act of awareness ripples outward into the collective. So when the silence asks, "What will you do now?" answer gently, "I will live." Not reactively, not mechanically, but intentionally, as one who remembers. Because to stand alone is not to be lonely. It is to stand in truth. And to stand in truth is to become a light, the kind that doesn't blind but reveals. That's the paradox Jung leaves us with. Freedom and responsibility are the same thing. The moment you realize that no one is coming to save you is also the moment you realize you were never lost. Freedom, in the language of the soul, is simply this: to live in alignment with what you already are. Every spiritual journey ends the same way, not in the clouds, but back on the ground. The pilgrim returns home, carrying dust on their feet and light in their eyes. And that is precisely where the hardest part begins. It's one thing to meet the soul in solitude. It's another to keep hearing it in the noise of the marketplace. Jung understood this tension deeply. He said that the true test of individuation is not what happens in isolation, but what happens after, when the awakened person must re-enter the world of forms, systems, and expectations. The integration of inner and outer is the final act of alchemy. When you come back from solitude, you no longer fit the old patterns. Conversations feel different. Pleasures feel quieter. You notice how much of life runs on autopilot, and you feel both tenderness and sadness watching it. The world hasn't changed, but you have. And that's enough to make everything look new. This is the archetype of the return of the hero, the moment after enlightenment, when consciousness must translate itself into compassion. In myth, the hero always brings something back: fire, medicine, wisdom. The gift is never for him alone. Jung saw this pattern as psychological truth. Once you face the unconscious, you inherit a responsibility to embody what you've learned. Awareness that stays private becomes sterile. Awareness that serves becomes sacred. But this return is not romantic. The world doesn't always welcome transformation. People prefer who you were, not who you've become. They liked your certainty, not your questions. The individuated person threatens the collective comfort simply by existing, because their authenticity exposes the inauthenticity of others. Jung called this the loneliness of the awakened. He knew it firsthand. After his break with Freud, Jung was seen as eccentric, mystical, even mad. Yet he kept writing, drawing, teaching, not to convince but to witness. Loneliness, he wrote, does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate what is important to you. That sentence could describe our entire century. Still, Jung never withdrew from the world. He treated patients, built his home by the lake, raised children, studied symbols, all while maintaining his dialogue with the soul. He proved that the spiritual life is not a retreat from the ordinary, it's a deepening of it. To live fully, he said, is to live the symbols that move you. When solitude becomes integration, the smallest acts turn sacred. The way you speak to a stranger, the way you drink water, the way you pause before reacting, all become expressions of consciousness. You no longer need to preach what you found, your being speaks it for you. Jung believed this was the highest form of religion, not belief in words, but devotion in presence. Returning to the world after solitude means carrying the stillness inside you like an inner tuning fork. You become sensitive to dissonance, to falseness, noise, haste, but instead of condemning it, you listen. Because now you understand that every unconscious act is just someone else's forgotten soul crying for attention. Compassion replaces judgment. You no longer need to fix the world. You participate in it awake. This is what Jung meant by the individuation of the collective. He believed that each person who becomes conscious contributes to the healing of the whole. The world will ask you who you are, he said, and if you don't know, the world will tell you. But if you do know, if you've met yourself, then you no longer echo the world as madness. You offer it meaning. The return to the world then is not a fall from grace, it's grace embodied. You discover that solitude was never meant to be a hiding place. It was training for intimacy. True solitude doesn't separate you from others. It prepares you to meet them as they are. It refines empathy, humbles certainty, and teaches you that the line between souls is thinner than it looks. You begin to sense what the mystics meant by in the world, but not of it. You live fully, work, love, suffer, create, but you do so with awareness. You see the drama unfolding, but you're not consumed by it. You become both participant and witness. In Jung's language, this is the completion of the circle. The ego, once cut off from the unconscious, now reunited with the self. What began as loneliness ends as connection. What felt like exile reveals itself as belonging. And maybe this is the quiet miracle of individuation. Not that it gives you power, but that it gives you peace, the kind that doesn't depend on circumstances. You stop needing the world to understand you because you finally understand yourself. So when you step back into the noise, the emails, the traffic, the endless motion, carry the silence with you like a secret prayer. You are not escaping life, you are sanctifying it. Because in the end, the goal of solitude was never to separate you from the world. It was to teach you how to love it consciously. In the end, all journeys turn into circles. What began as exile becomes return. What began as emptiness becomes fullness. What began as loneliness becomes love. This is the secret rhythm of the soul, the movement from separation to connection, from darkness to light, from me to everything. When Jung spoke of individuation, he never described it as ascension. He described it as a circle, the mandala, the symbol that appears spontaneously in dreams when the psyche approaches wholeness. It represents the self, the totality of consciousness and unconsciousness united in harmony. The circle doesn't reject opposites, it contains them. In solitude, you walk through every quadrant of that circle: fear, silence, revelation, freedom, return. Each phase seemed like an end, yet each was only a turn of the spiral. The soul never moves in straight lines. It deepens through repetition, each cycle carrying you closer to the center. The center, that still point Jung called the self, is not a destination. It is the awareness that has been present in every moment of the path. Even in despair, even in confusion, it watched quietly. You didn't find it. It found you the moment you stopped running. That's the paradox of awakening. We search the world for what never left us. If you listen now, you can feel it. That quiet pulse behind everything. That invisible rhythm linking all things. It's the same rhythm that moves the tides and the stars, the same intelligence that shaped your first breath. It has no name, yet every name points to it. Some call it God, others nature, others simply being. Jung called it the self, the living symbol of divine totality. He believed that when an individual becomes whole, something shifts in the collective. Consciousness doesn't evolve through systems, he said, but through souls, one by one, each person integrating their shadow. balancing their opposites and quietly radiating coherence. Wholeness is contagious. That is why the work of solitude, though invisible, is never selfish. Each person who makes peace within contributes to peace without. Now, standing at the end of the circle, you realize that solitude was never the opposite of love. It was its preparation. To love another deeply, you must first learn to love in silence, without possession, without demand. Solitude teaches that it dissolves need until only presence remains. The one who has met themselves no longer seeks completion through others. They meet others as fellow expressions of the same mystery. That is the alchemy Jung spoke of, turning loneliness into communion, ego into essence, noise into song. The individual becomes transparent like clear glass. Life shines through them without distortion. It doesn't mean they stop suffering. They still grieve, still doubt, still long. But their suffering no longer isolates them. It connects them. They understand that pain too is part of the pattern, that even the cracks in the circle belong to the design. And so the circle closes, not as a wall, but as an embrace. The desert, the temple, the return, the freedom, all were faces of the same silence calling you home. The silence is still here, but it no longer frightens you. You recognize it now as the breath of the world. Jung wrote near the end of his life, "I am astonished, disappointed, pleased with myself. I am distressed, depressed, rapturous, all at once. I am incapable of determining my position. Everything is becoming more itself." That's what individuation feels like. Not perfection, but participation. The realization that everything belongs. And perhaps that's the meaning of solitude after all. Not an escape from life, but a reconciliation with it. A rediscovery that you and life were never two. You were the ocean pretending to be a wave. So now when you look at the world, the people, the noise, the chaos, you see patterns where you once saw randomness. You hear music where you once heard confusion. You no longer ask, "When will I find peace?" Because peace is no longer something to find. It's the space between thoughts, the pause before words, the silence inside sound. This is what Jung meant by the reconciliation of opposites. To realize that loneliness and connection, silence and sound, shadow and light are all expressions of the same whole. The circle closes, not to end, but to begin again. Because every ending is just another name for awakening. If you've made it here, you've already walked through silence. You've crossed deserts, sat in temples, carried the weight of freedom, and returned to the world with your eyes open. And maybe, just maybe, something inside you is quieter now. That quiet isn't emptiness. It's recognition. It's your soul remembering that it was never lost, only unheard. It's the beginning of a new dialogue. Not between you and me, but between you and yourself. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." That is what this space is about. Every video, every reflection, every silence we share here is another small step toward that becoming. This isn't just a channel, it's a meeting place for souls in transformation. A sanctuary for those who are tired of the noise but still believe in meaning. If something in this journey has touched you, if you felt seen, understood, or simply less alone, then I invite you to stay. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, share this light. Not because the algorithm needs it, but because awareness does. Every gesture of attention, every word you write in the comments helps build a constellation of consciousness, a quiet network of people awakening together. You're not just supporting a channel, you're participating in a movement, a remembering. Because what we explore here, Jung's ideas, symbols, dreams, love and shadow, they're not theory. They're living maps. They help us navigate the wilderness of being human. And the world needs that. It needs people who can sit in silence without fear. It needs minds that see meaning in chaos and hearts that remain soft in a hard age. It needs souls that remember the sacred when everything feels disposable. So take a breath, look within. And if these words resonated, let that resonance be your offering. A like, a comment, a share. Not as a transaction, but as a ritual. A way of saying, I'm here, I'm awake, I'm part of this. Because the truth is, none of us are really alone. Each time one person dares to look inward, it gives courage to another. Each small act of awareness ripples outward, shaping the collective dream we all share. That's how the circle continues. That's how light survives the night. So thank you for listening, for feeling, for walking with me through this silence. Until the next journey, may you carry this stillness with you, may you find beauty in your solitude, And may you remember, you are not alone. You are the silence made conscious. You are the soul, awake. Subscribe, like, share, and let's keep awakening together.